Now it's time for Abraham Lincoln to run for president. So, with Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860, we're going to see basically the straw that broke the camel's back. All these other events happening are kind of leading to this critical moment now. Okay. So, I want to be clear, Abraham Lincoln becoming president did not cause the Civil War by itself, but rather it was all these other causes of the Civil War. And then finally, Abraham Lincoln was elected, and it made the Southern states go, that's it, we're done. So let's take a look at what actually happened with the election. So it was more than just two people running. We can see there were actually four people running for president that year in 1860. And Abraham Lincoln was the Republican nominee. He was the candidate running from the political party of the Republicans. But we can also see that from the South, the Democrats couldn't make up their mind. The Democrats couldn't choose who they wanted to run for president. And so three people from the South ended up running. And one of them, named John Bell, ended up running for a different political party. He actually left the Democratic Party. So the Southern states ended up splitting their votes three different ways, right? But then almost all of the northern states, in fact, I think all of the northern states, not quite, almost all of the northern states ended up voting for Abraham Lincoln, the Republican. So this election was basically the northern states agreeing on who they wanted to be president, but the southern states divided their votes three different ways. And so Abraham Lincoln ended up winning the election, even though he didn't win most of the people's votes. Right? He did not win more than 50% of the votes because the southern states ended up dividing their votes three different ways. Now, here's the other thing. In many of the states in the South, they refused to recognize the Republican Party as even existing. They were like, we don't believe that anti-slavery party. That's a bunch of nonsense. So Abraham Lincoln's name didn't even appear on the ballot in many of the states in the South. And so when they find out who won the election, of course they were expecting to hear a name that was on their ballot, right? But when they hear that some other guy, Abraham Lincoln of the Republican Party, ends up winning the presidency, they were like, whoa, hold on a second. Like, I couldn't have even voted for him if I did want to, which I didn't want to, but if I did want to, his name wasn't even on my ballot because the southern states refused to put Abraham Lincoln's name on the ballot. But because the southern states divided all their votes between three different people, Abraham Lincoln ended up getting all the votes in the North, and so he rightfully and fairly became the president of the United States. But the southern states were like, not my president. I didn't vote for him. His name wasn't even on the ballot. And so remember what the southern states said when the Republican Party began? Remember when they said, if a Republican ever becomes president, then we're going to leave the country. And so that's what happened next. One by one, starting with South Carolina and then all of the others, the states in the South left the country. They ran away from home, and they then created their own country called the Confederate States of America. So what happened is after Abraham Lincoln was elected president, the southern states said, that's it. We're clearly not going to get our way being part of the United States anymore. So let's create our own country. And they did, right? They made their own country called the Confederate States of America. They elected their own president. His name was Jefferson Davis. They had their own capital city. It was Richmond, Virginia. They printed their own money, right? They had their own government. And the Confederate States of America said, we're not part of the United States anymore because we don't want to be told what to do. So the Civil War was not about slavery. The Civil War was about bringing the Confederate States back into the country. Abraham Lincoln said, remember what I said about a nation divided against itself cannot stand? I was right. And so Lincoln ended up fighting the South, right? The United States invaded the South. They invaded the Confederate States to bring them back. That's what the Civil War was about. The Civil War was about bringing the Southern states back into the United States. The Civil War was about ending the Confederate States of America and bringing them back into the United States of America. But we cannot ignore why the Southern states left, right? The Southern states left because they wanted to continue slavery. And they saw that if Abraham Lincoln, a Republican, was going to be president, then their precious slavery would come to an end. So because they wanted to keep slavery, they left the country and became the Confederate States of America. So the Civil War was entirely about slavery, but the war itself was to bring the Southern states back. The reason they left was because they wanted slavery. So next week, we'll be looking more specifically at events of the Civil War and how things ended up going down and how the end of the Civil War actually did end slavery in our country. So we'll get there next week. Take a moment now to write down the important information about Lincoln's election in your chart.